Your life's got nothing in it worth being proud of, Dad. Just don't come to the wedding. My daughter said that to me in her own kitchen, the kitchen I'd helped her paint 2 summers back, and she said it the way you'd tell a courier he's left a parcel at the wrong house. Flat. Final. Her fiancé stood behind her with his arms folded, and I swear there was the smallest twitch at the corner of his mouth. I put my mug down on the bench, careful, because my hands wanted to shake and I wasn't going to give him that. All right then, love, I said. If that's what you want. I drove home over the Kaimais in the dark, and the whole way down the other side I kept thinking one thing. She'd made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. And she wasn't going to like mine one bit. I should back up, because none of this makes sense unless you know what the 8 months before that night looked like. My name doesn't matter much, but I'll give it to you anyway. Bevan Stroud. 63 years old, 40 of those spent as a fitter and turner at the port in Tauranga, the last 15 running maintenance crews and, on the side, organizing every retirement due, fundraiser and Christmas function the union and the local RSA ever put on. I'm a widower. My wife Nair died of breast cancer when our daughter Tegan was 14, and from that day it was the two of us. I learned to plait hair off a YouTube video. I sat outside dressing rooms holding handbags. I drove her to netball in Hamilton at 6 in the morning with frost on the windscreen and never once complained, because complaining felt like an insult to the privilege of it. Tegan got engaged last winter to a fellow called Julian Ashcombe. Auckland family. Remuera. His mother, Annabelle, ran some sort of consultancy and never let you forget she'd once organized a function for the Governor-General. His father I met exactly twice, and both times he looked at his watch while shaking my hand. Now, here's the part people always ask about, so I'll get it out of the way early. If the Ashcombes were so flash, why was I the one paying for the wedding? I asked the same question, once, very politely, over dinner at their place. Annabelle laughed like I'd told a joke and said, "Oh, but tradition, Bevan. The bride's family hosts. We wouldn't dream of treading on your toes." And Julian smiled and said, "Dad's always said you can tell a man's character by how he sends his daughter off." I found out much later, from a bloke who did their accounts, that the Ashcombes were what you'd call asset-rich and cash-buggered, leveraged to the eyeballs on 2 coastal properties they couldn't sell. The flash was a costume. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that my daughter wanted a beautiful wedding, and I had 38 years of savings and a freshly paid-off house, and there is nothing a father like me won't do when his only child looks at him the way Tegan used to look at me. So I paid. The venue was a lodge out past Rotorua, lake views, the works. $22,000, my name on the contract. The caterer was an old mate, Sepha, who'd done our union functions for 20 years and gave me a price he'd give nobody else, $11,000 for 160 guests. The band, 4.5. The photographer, a young fella called Dion who'd shot my nephew's wedding, 3.5. The flowers, 6,000, because Tegan wanted dahlias, the dark red ones, the same ones Nair grew along our back fence, and I drove to 3 growers between here and Cambridge to find someone who could guarantee them in March. And the dress. The dress was $9,500 from a designer in Parnell, and I paid the deposit and signed for the balance and the alterations, and when Tegan came out of that fitting room the first time, I had to look at my shoes for a second. She was Nair all over again. Same shoulders. Same way of standing. All up, with the small stuff, the cake, the celebrant, the classic jag she wanted to arrive in, I was in for a touch over $61,000. I picked up extra weekend call-outs at the port at an age when my knees sound like a bag of gravel, and I did it whistling. I want you to understand that. I did it whistling. The trouble came on slow, the way rot does. It started with little corrections. We were at a planning meeting, the 3 of us and Annabelle on speakerphone, and I mentioned the forecast looked dodgy for an outdoor ceremony in March, that we ought to lock in the lodge's covered terrace as a backup. Tegan talked straight over me. Julian's mom has marquees, Dad. Proper ones. She does this professionally. And Julian gave me this small, patient smile and said, "No offense, but there's a difference between what Mom does and, sausage sizzles at the RSA." I laughed it off. "You do, the first time." But it kept coming. My caterer mate Sefa was suddenly a worry. Was the food going to be? Julian searched for the word like he was picking up something sticky. Appropriate? The band I'd booked, the one that played the song Tegan had danced to standing on my feet as a 5-year-old, was a bit pub, apparently. Every choice we'd made together across 8 months, choices Tegan had cried happy tears over, got redescribed as something I'd forced on her. And the worst part, the part that still catches me at 2 in the morning, is that Tegan started agreeing with him. I'd watch it happen in real time. She'd look at me, then look at him, and choose him every single time, and each time the choosing got faster. The night it all ended, I'd driven up to their place in Hamilton with the seating plan and a bottle of wine. I never got to open the wine. Julian had clearly prepared remarks. He sat me down at my own daughter's table and explained, in the voice you'd use on a confused old dog, that they felt I was too invested in the wedding. That I was using money as a leash. That I kept bringing up Tegan's late mother, the dahlias, the song, as emotional leverage. That one put me on my feet. I told him he could say what he liked about me, but he would not stand in that kitchen and turn nair into a tactic. And I looked at Tegan, waiting, the way you wait for a kick you already know isn't coming. Waiting for her to say, "That's enough, that's my mum you're talking about." Instead, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face in 28 years. Not anger. Contempt. And she said the thing I told you at the start. "Your life's got nothing in it worth being proud of, Dad. A shed full of tools and a Union Jacket. Julian's family are real people, and you embarrass me. Just don't come to the wedding." Something in my chest didn't break, exactly. It came loose. Like a bolt that's been carrying load for 40 years finally shearing off, quiet, almost gentle. "All right then, love. If that's what you want." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold and Gare's photo looking at me from the windowsill, and somewhere around 4 in the morning the grief finished and something much calmer took its place. They didn't want my life at that wedding. Fair enough. But here's the thing nobody in that Flash family had bothered to notice. My embarrassing little life was the scaffolding holding their entire society wedding up. Every contract. Every deposit. Every signature. Mine. She'd asked me not to show up. So I decided to give her exactly what she'd asked for. All of me would stay home. Including my checkbook. At 9:01 the next morning, I rang the lodge. "Lovely woman, the manager." I explained, calm as a lake, that I was canceling the booking under my name. 60 days out, I forfeited the $5,000 deposit and recovered 17. She asked if everything was all right. "Everything's fine," I said. "Better than it's been in months." Then Sefa. That was the hard one, because he's a mate, and mates don't muck mates around. I told him the truth, all of it, sitting in his van outside his kitchen with 2 pies between us. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I'll carry to my grave. "Bevan," he said, "I've watched you carry that girl on your shoulders for 20 years. A man can put a child down when she starts spitting on his head. Full refund, brother." We never spoke of it again. The band, cancelled, refunded. Dion the photographer, cancelled. He kept his deposit and shook my hand down the phone, if a man can do that. The Jag, cancelled. The cake, half back. The celebrant, full refund, and she stayed on the line 20 minutes just to make sure I was okay, which is more than my own daughter had done in 2 months. The dress was the last call, and the one I thought hardest about, so listen carefully because this matters. The gown wasn't finished. It was sitting in the Parnell workroom with the final alterations still to do, deposit paid by me, balance and alteration fees owing, contract in my name. I told the designer I was canceling the balance and wouldn't be paying for the alterations. She explained the deposit was gone either way and asked what she should do with the gown. And I said, if my daughter wants it, she can settle the remainder herself and take it as it stands. Unfinished. As is. I wasn't going to take a dress off a bride's back. I just wasn't going to keep paying for one who'd told me her father's life was nothing. By 3 that afternoon, I'd clawed back a little over $43,000 of my 61. The rest, I decided, was the cost of an education. Cheap, really, for what it taught me. The phone went off at 5:30. Tegan. Dad, what have you done? The lodge rang. Julian's mom, what have you done? And I said, I did what you asked, love. I stepped out of your wedding. Every part of me. Turns out the embarrassing parts were load-bearing. She was screaming when I hung up. The texts came in waves for 2 hours. You're insane. Julian says you're having some kind of episode. We can get you help, Dad. And then the last one, the one that told me everything, how could you do this to me? Not one word, in all of it, taking back what she'd said. Not one. I typed one reply. You did this, Tegan, the night you decided your mother's dahlias were a manipulation and your father's life was an embarrassment. Good luck explaining to the Ashcombs why all their important guests will be eating club sandwiches in a community hall. Then I put the phone in the kitchen drawer, poured 2 fingers of the good whiskey, and sat on my back step watching the two-way rough each other up in the Kauai, and I felt something I hadn't felt since before the engagement. Quiet. Actual quiet, inside. They came round 2 days later, of course. Both cars in my driveway, her little Suzuki and his black Audi, so I knew it was choreographed. Tegan had been crying, you could see it under the makeup, and some old reflex in me ached at that, I won't pretend it didn't. Julian wore the suit he wears when he wants to be the adult in the room. They sat on my couch, the same couch where Tegan and I had spread out venue brochures 100 times, and Julian opened with, Bevan, I think we need to have a mature conversation about the damage you've caused. I let that sit a moment. Then I asked Tegan, just her, which part she'd come to apologize for. The bit about my life having nothing in it? The bit about her mother being a tactic? Or just the bit where the money stopped? She opened her mouth and Julian answered for her, she's under enormous stress, things were said, and I held up one hand, the hand with 40 years of scars on it, and I said, son, I've sat through more union negotiations than you've had hot dinners, and I know the difference between an apology and an opening offer. When my daughter wants to talk to her father, she knows where I live. Until then, this conversation is between you and your mother's marquise. They went ahead with the wedding. Of course they did, the invitations were out, and the Ashcombs would sooner have died than publicly postpone. But here's what I heard, because in a town like ours you hear everything. The lodge was gone, rebooked the same week by a corporate crowd. The replacement was the Memorial Hall on 6 days' notice. The marquise never materialized, funny that. Annabelle's professional contacts all turned out to need payment up front, which apparently was a problem, which is when I started to understand what the accountant fellow later confirmed. The flash was a costume. And yes, I went. I thought a long time about whether to tell this part, because half of you are going to say I went too far, and you might be right, and the other half are going to stand up and cheer, and you might be right too. All I can do is tell you what happened. She told me not to show up. But I'm her father. We show up. That's the whole job, showing up, wanted or not. So on the day, I put on my one good suit, the one I'd bought for Ndir's funeral, and I drove to the Memorial Hall and stood at the back. Folding chairs in crooked rows. Gaps where guests had quietly pulled the pin. Sausage rolls on trestle tables under glad wrap. Julian up the front in a hired suit that didn't sit right across the shoulders, because hired was suddenly the budget. And Tegan in the back corner in $9,500 of unfinished dress, pinned at the side seam where the alterations should have been, holding supermarket chrysanthemums because dark red dahlias in March take a man who'll drive to Cambridge for them, and she'd sent that man home. She saw me, and her face did this terrible journey. Shock. Then hope, actual hope, and that hurt worse than anything she'd said, because I knew what the hope was for. Dad's here, Dad will fix it, Dad always fixes it. I didn't make a speech. I want that on the record, because I'd planned one. Oh, I'd written a beauty in my head at 2 in the morning. But standing there looking at her, I found I only had 3 sentences in me, and I kept my voice low, just for her, though the room had gone quiet enough that it carried anyway. I said, "You look like your mother." I said, "Everything missing from this room today, I'd have given you twice over, for 1 ounce of respect." And I said, "I hope the life you've chosen is worth the one you threw away." Then I put the small parcel I'd brought on the gift table, inside it the spare key to my house, the same key she'd had since she was 9, because she'd left hers on my kitchen table the night she told me not to come, and I walked out. Behind me I heard Annabelle's voice going up like a kettle and a chair scrape and Tegan starting to cry, and I kept walking, and the autumn sun outside was the kindest thing that had touched me in months. The marriage lasted 7 months. The Ashton's money trouble came out by Christmas, the coastal properties went to mortgagee sale, and Julian, who had married what he thought was a family that pays for things, discovered his wife came with a father who no longer would. He was gone by the end of winter. I heard he told people Tegan's family had embarrassed him. She rang me in September. I let it go to the answer phone the first 3 times, not out of cruelty, but because I'd promised myself I'd only pick up when I could do it without my chest going tight. The 4th time, I answered. She didn't ask for money. She didn't mention the wedding. She just said, "Dad, I've been going through Mom's old garden photos," and she cried for a solid minute, and then she said, "I knew what the dahlias meant. I always knew." He told me I only thought I knew, and I believed him, and I don't know how I let that happen. We're talking again. Slowly. She comes round on Sundays and we're rebuilding the back fence garden, the 2 of us, dahlias going in for autumn. I haven't given her a cent and she hasn't asked for one, and honestly, that's how I know there might be something there worth saving. Forgiveness I handed over free. Trust, I told her, she can earn back at the same rate I earned that $61,000. Slowly, with her hands, showing up every week whether she feels like it or not. I'm 64 next month, and here's what that year taught me, so take it from an old fitter who learned it the expensive way. Love your kids with everything you've got, but don't ever confuse funding someone with being valued by them, because a wallet can be loved long after the man holding it isn't. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional money, and it surely doesn't mean unconditional disrespect. Watch closely who your children become when someone new is whispering in their ear, and if the person they're becoming would spit on the person who raised them, say something early, while there's still time to say it gently. And remember this above all. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is step back and let a grown child feel the full weight of their own choices, because consequences teach what kindness has stopped being able to. A father's job is to show up. It was never to kneel. When I look back on that year, the thing that stays with me isn't the wedding or the canceled contracts. It's how slowly it all happened, and how I almost didn't notice. Tegan didn't turn on me in one night. She was worn down, one small correction at a time, by a man who needed her to believe her father was an embarrassment so that he could feel like the only solid thing in her life. That's the part one wants you to take away, because cause and effect in these stories is never as sudden as it looks. Julian didn't break us with one cruel sentence. He broke us with 8 months of patient little ones, and I let the early ones slide because I told myself a good father doesn't make a fuss. I was wrong about that. A good father does make a fuss, early, while it's still small enough to fix gently. I think a lot about why I was able to walk out of that memorial hall without falling apart, and the honest answer is that I'd already done the hard work years before, without knowing it. 40 years of getting up at 3:30, of showing up to call-outs when my niece screamed, of burying Nair and learning to plait a 14-year-old's hair off a video. All of that built something in me that wasn't money. It was the quiet certainty that my life had weight whether Tegan saw it or not. When she told me it was worthless, the words landed, but they didn't take root, because I knew the ground they were trying to grow in. That's what nerve really is. Not shouting back. Just refusing to hand a stranger the authority to tell you who you are, And here's the thing about doing the right hard thing instead of the easy soft thing. Stopping the payments was a revenge, though I won't pretend part of me didn't feel the satisfaction of it. It was the first honest decision I'd made in months. For 8 months every choice ran through one question: will this keep Tegan happy? The day I started asking will this be right instead, the fog lifted. We do our children no favors by funding the worst version of them. Sometimes love has to look like a closed checkbook and an open door. Tegan and I are putting dahlias in the back fence now, the dark red ones her mother grew. She hasn't asked for a cent and I haven't offered one, and that's exactly why I trust the new thing we're building. She's earning it back the only way trust can be earned, slowly, with her hands, showing up on Sundays whether she feels like it or not. I forgave her the first week. Forgiveness is cheap and I gave it freely. Trust is dear, and she's paying it off the same way I paid off that $61,000. One honest day at a time. So love your kids fiercely. But guard your own worth like the load-bearing thing it is. Because the day you let someone else set the price of your life is the day you start paying for a wedding you were told not to attend. Show up. Always show up. Just never, ever kneel.